I was wiping oil into a half-finished walnut tabletop when I heard suitcase wheels grinding on the gravel. I wore an old denim jacket over a gray tee dusted with sawdust. I opened the glass door, and there, standing in the middle of the path lined with wild roses, was Sarah, my ex-wife's younger sister. The woman I had not seen in 4 years. She was quietly beautiful, leaning slightly, eyes red but dry, a silver suitcase by her right hand. She said very softly, "I have nowhere left to go, Adam." I had closed that door on the Whitmores 4 years before. That morning, I opened more than one door again. My name is Adam Carter. I am 39 years old. I restore antique furniture out of a small workshop behind the farmhouse I bought with the money I saved after my marriage came apart. The house sits at the end of a gravel road in Lexington, Virginia, with white siding, a black iron fence, and a meadow that rolls back into a wall of maple trees. I bought it because it was the opposite of every apartment Elena and I had ever shared. Elena and I were married for 7 years. She wanted Manhattan, she wanted parties, she wanted the lights, I wanted wood, I wanted quiet. I wanted a child she said she was not ready for. 4 years ago, she signed the divorce papers inside 48 hours and flew to Miami with a man named Ryan. We had no children together. I took everything the settlement gave me and drove south into Virginia, and I learned how to cook dinner for one. I want to say it plainly. I do not hate Elena. I'm only tired of her. There is a difference, and that difference is what kept me alive those first lonely months in this house. I never sent an angry letter. I never spoke her name out loud to my neighbors. I let her become a chapter I had already finished reading. My days follow a rhythm I have learned to love. I wake at 5:30, I grind beans and brew black coffee, I walk out to the workshop while the grass is still wet. I work until noon, then I eat a sandwich of sharp cheddar on day-old sourdough on the back porch, and I watch the meadow stretch toward the maples. My clients are a few old families up in Charlottesville, a small regional museum, and now and then a filmmaker who wants a real prop instead of a plastic one. It is not a glamorous life, it is mine. I remembered Sarah from the first Whitmore dinner I ever sat through. She was 26 then, at the far end of the table. Quiet, the kind of quiet that listens. She did not say much that night. She only smiled when I told the story of an old jointer plane that jammed and threw a curl of pine into my coffee. Later that evening, after Elena had snapped at me in front of her parents for some small thing I cannot remember now, Sarah passed me in the hallway and asked very softly, "Are you okay?" I had forgotten that until today. I invited her inside. I poured her a glass of cold water. She sat on the old armchair near the window, her hands folded tight in her lap, the silver suitcase beside her ankles. I asked her, "Does Elena know you are here?" She shook her head. I asked, "What about Michael?" She was quiet for a long time, looking at her shoes. Then she said, "He knows. He is the reason I am here." I did not press. I have lived long enough to know that some sentences need air before they can finish themselves. I went to the kitchen to put a kettle on, and when I came back, she was bent over the outer pocket of her suitcase, searching for a tissue. A small object slipped out of the pocket and rolled across the wide pine floorboards toward my boot. I bent down and picked it up. It was a tiny wooden sparrow, no bigger than the tip of my thumb, the linseed varnish worn down to bare grain along its back. I knew that carving. I knew the angle of those wing cuts because they were mine. I did not say anything. I set the bird on the table between us. Her face went red, and she slipped it back into her pocket without meeting my eyes. I thought that evening that it would only be one night, one dinner, one cup of tea, one quiet condolence about a broken engagement. I thought that by sunrise, she would be gone, the way she had always seemed to be gone from every house she ever entered. The grandfather clock on the mantel ticked. The late afternoon light came in gold through the double window. The workshop still smelled faintly of beeswax and walnut. I told myself I was being kind. That was all. Sarah stayed. I made up the spare bedroom at the top of the stairs, the one I had once meant to be a child's room and never had reason to finish. She did not ask why the walls were a soft cream color or why there was a small, unused crib mattress leaning behind the closet. She only set her suitcase down at the foot of the bed, took the wooden sparrow out of her pocket, and placed it carefully on the windowsill where it could catch the morning light. Then she turned to me and said, "Thank you." So quietly I almost missed it. I stood in the doorway for a second longer than I should have because something about the way she set that bird down looked like a person finishing a journey, not starting one. The first week passed slow, the way wood takes shape under your hands. Sarah rose earlier than I expected. She made pour-over coffee in the Chemex, exactly the way I liked it, with the bloom done at 30 seconds and the pour spiraling outward from the center. I had never told her that. She read a book on the porch while I worked. She did not turn her phone on. She did not mention Michael. She did not mention Elena. She moved through the house like a person who already knew the floor plan in her sleep, although I had never given her a tour. On the fourth day, I was fixing the loose hinge on her bedroom door. She came up the stairs with a screwdriver I had not asked for, and when she handed it to me, our fingers touched. We both pulled back too quickly, and neither of us said a word about it. She turned toward the window and pretended to fix the curtain, and I pretended to tighten a screw that was already tight. We stood there in that small, careful silence 4 feet apart until I cleared my throat and went back downstairs to look for a hinge pin I did not actually need. I sat in the workshop afterward and waited for my hands to stop shaking. On the fourth day, she brought a tray of lunch out to the workshop, set it on the stool beside my bench, and walked back toward the house before I could thank her. She had cut the sandwich into 2 perfect triangles, the way my mother used to. I ate it slowly, sitting in the shavings, not understanding why that small act felt like the most attended to I had been in years. On the 5th day, I caught her standing in front of the bookshelf, looking at the only photograph of Elena I had not put away. It was a group wedding picture with Sarah in the corner, in a pale green bridesmaid dress, her hands folded in front of her. She was not looking at her sister in the picture. She was looking at herself, at the girl in the corner she used to be, the way a person looks at a witness they have not spoken to in years. On the 6th night, a storm rolled in, and the power went out. I lit 2 candles in the living room and set them between us on the coffee table. The rain came hard on the metal roof, and the windows rattled in their old frames. For the first time, Sarah talked, and she did not stop for almost an hour. She told me she had taught 4th grade for 7 years in Roanoke. She told me she had once wanted to apprentice with a woodworker, an old man near Lynchburg, but her father had said no Whitmore daughter was going to wear an apron for a living. I laughed. Well, your father did not like me for the same reason. She looked at me a long time, the candle flame moving across her face, and then she said, "I know." I still thought she was at my house because her engagement had ended. I told myself the long looks were just exhaustion. I told myself that the way her eyes lingered on my back while I planed a board was nothing more than a tired woman watching a steady motion, because steady motion was what she needed in her life right then. But anyone watching from the outside would have seen what I refused to see. She knew where I kept the linseed oil, in the 4th drawer down from the top, where I had moved it after the move, and never put it back the way Elena had once organized things. She knew I always sat in the right-hand chair at the table. She knew which mug was mine, the heavy gray one with a chip on the handle, and she set it in front of me every morning without asking. The wooden sparrow stood on her windowsill every morning. She wiped the dust off it with the corner of her sleeve before she came down for coffee. I saw her do it once when I came up the stairs to grab a tape measure I had left on the landing. She did not see me. She held the bird in her palm for a long second, and then she set it down with the care a person uses for something that has survived a long time. I went back down the stairs without the tape measure. I sat in the kitchen and tried to remember when I had carved it. It came back to me slowly. Thanksgiving, 6 years ago. In her parents' kitchen. I had been whittling a scrap of basswood at the counter while the women argued in the dining room. Sarah had passed by, looked at the curls of wood on the cutting board, and said, "That is pretty." I had finished it on a whim and handed it to her. I had forgotten about it the same hour. She had not. One night, near 11, the phone in her pocket buzzed. She looked at the screen, and her face changed. She walked out to the porch. I was reading on the couch with the windows half open, and I caught 2 sentences before she lowered her voice. "Stop calling Michael. I told you the real reason." I did not ask her about it when she came back inside. She did not offer. She only sat down at the other end of the couch with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold and watched the dark line of the meadow through the screen door. After a long time, she said, "I am sorry the phone keeps ringing in your house." I said, "Sarah, it is your phone." She looked at me with something that was almost gratitude, and I had to look down at my book to keep from saying anything I would regret. The next afternoon, while she was helping me sort through a box of brass drawer pulls, she said without looking up, "Have you ever wondered why I left Elena's wedding halfway through?" "I had wondered once," I said. "I thought you were sick." She shook her head slowly. "I was not sick. I just could not sit there and watch." I asked, "Watch what?" She did not answer. She stood up and walked to the sink and washed 2 cups that were already clean. I sat with the drawer pulls scattered in my lap, and I did not understand what she had not said. I would understand it 4 weeks later, and I would feel like a fool. By the end of the second week, she called me Adam for the first time. Not Mr. Carter, not the polite distance of Adam with her old sister's last name hanging in the air, just Adam called from the kitchen, the way you call someone whose name has lived in your mouth a long time. I stood in the doorway of the workshop and listened to it land. Then I went inside and answered her. She had only wanted to ask where I kept the small saucers, but the way she said my name stayed with me the rest of the afternoon. That night, she asked if she could stay another 2 weeks. I said yes too fast. I told myself over and over, she is your ex-wife's sister. That is all. That is all. I did not sleep that night. I heard her footsteps come past my door and stop for exactly 4 seconds before they kept moving down the hall. I counted those 4 seconds in the dark, and I knew that whatever was happening in this house was no longer something I could pretend was nothing. Saturday morning, the white Range Rover came up the gravel and stopped under the maples. I knew the sound of that engine before I knew the woman driving it. Elena stepped out in a way only Elena steps out of a car, with the door swung wide and her sunglasses pushed up into her hair like a tiara. Her voice carried over the meadow before she even reached the porch. She had flown into Charlottesville for what she called a family event. And somewhere along the way, she had heard that Sarah was no longer answering her phone in Roanoke. She came up the path with a smile I remembered from a dozen dinner parties. "Adam," she said, "repairing something that belongs to my family again, are we?" The sentence had 2 layers. I did not bite. I held the door open and asked her if she wanted coffee. My hands were steady. That, more than anything else, surprised me. 4 years ago, her voice could shake me from across a room. Now it sounded like weather, the kind you wait out from inside. She stepped past me, and the perfume she always wore filled the front room within seconds. She walked the floor of my house the way a buyer walks a property she has already decided not to bid on. Her eyes touched the photos on the mantle, the gray throw on the back of the couch, the half-drunk cup of tea Sarah had left beside the armchair. She did not miss any of it. She had never missed anything in her life. The only thing she ever lost was the part of me that used to want her approval, and even that I had to teach myself how to take back. Then she turned the smile on Sarah, who was standing very still by the window. "Sweetheart," Elena said, "I told you. Michael told the whole family already. You cannot keep running into my ex-husband's house every time your life falls apart." Sarah did not answer. She did not even look up. Her right hand had moved to her left wrist, the way it did when she was bracing for something, and I noticed it, and Elena noticed me noticing it. And her smile sharpened by 1/4 of a degree. Elena pulled out her phone. She scrolled with the certainty of someone who had rehearsed this drive the entire way north from Charlottesville. She turned the screen and slid the phone across the kitchen counter toward me, the slow, practiced push of a lawyer setting down evidence. It was a text message from 5 years earlier, from Sarah to Elena, sent late on a Christmas night after too much wine. I read it once, then I read it again. "Sis, I am sorry. I cannot stop thinking about him. I will carry it the rest of my life. Please do not be angry with me." Elena crossed her arms. "Read it, Adam. My sweet little sister has been quietly in love with you for 7 years. Why do you think Michael called off the engagement?" He read her journal. I set the phone down on the counter. I did not look at Sarah. I looked at Elena, and I spoke very quietly. "You did not come here because you are worried about your sister. You came here because you cannot stand the idea that someone has loved me in a way you never did?" Elena laughed, dry, no humor in it. "You still think you are special, do you?" "No," I said. "I just think you are still the same." Sarah stood in the center of the living room. Her hands were crossed at her waist. She did not deny it. She did not cry. She did not beg me to listen. She only looked at me very calmly and said, "I am sorry you had to find out this way." There was no fear in her voice. There was no shame either, which surprised me more. It was the voice of a person who had already paid the price of the secret year after year, alone, and could not be charged for it twice. Then she walked up the stairs to get her suitcase. I went to the foot of the stairs and put my hand on the banister. I did not block her. Exactly. I just stood there and she stopped on the fourth step. Her eyes met mine and she did not look away. Elena raised her voice. Let her go, Adam. What is this? Are you going to marry my sister? Are you going to make yourself the joke of the whole town of Lexington? You think anyone in this state will believe you did not know about her the whole time we were married? I turned to face her. For the first time in the 7 years I had known her, and the 4 years I had been free of her, I spoke without softening the edges. Elena, 4 years ago you signed the papers in 48 hours. You did not ask me what I wanted. You did not ask who this house should belong to. You took the money and you left. You do not get to decide who is allowed to stand in this room anymore. Her face changed for half a second, then she covered it. She looked past me to the windowsill, where the wooden sparrow stood in the late morning light. She walked over and picked it up. She turned it in her fingers like it was a piece of evidence in a courtroom. You still keep these little toys around, she said with a laugh that had nothing soft in it. God, Adam, some men go gray. You went sentimental. I crossed the room and took it gently from her hand. I said, that is not mine. I walked to the foot of the stairs and held it out. Sarah came down 2 steps. Her hand was trembling when she took it from me. She closed her fingers around it the way someone closes their hand around the only thing they have left. Elena watched, and I saw it land in her face. The small private knowledge that the bird was not the toy she had thought it was, that something had been built between her sister and the man she used to call her husband while she had been busy being elsewhere. Elena made one last sound, a sharp, short breath through her nose. You will both regret this, she said. The Range Rover's tires tore long furrows through the gravel on the way out. I did not watch her go. I stood with my back to the window and listened until the engine noise stopped existing. The house was very quiet after that. Sarah would not look at me. I did not say anything. I went into the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea, the slow way, with loose leaves and the strainer Elena used to call old-fashioned. I set one in front of Sarah. I said, tonight you sleep in your room. Tomorrow we talk. She nodded just once. The perfume Elena wore still hung in the air for hours. That heavy Tom Ford scent that always made my throat feel narrow. The grandfather clock ticked. Sometime after midnight, I heard her crying through the wall. Very small, not sobbing, just breathing in a way that breaks something quiet inside a person who is listening. I lay on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I had cried and could not. The next morning, I was up before the sun. When I came downstairs, Sarah was already on the back porch with a cup of coffee held in both hands. The mist still lay on the meadow in long ribbons. The wooden sparrow stood at the center of the small porch table between us, the way a witness stands. She did not turn when I came out. She only said, almost to herself, I have been awake since 4 o'clock. I sat down across from her, and the chair creaked, and neither of us spoke for a long minute. The light was the gray color it gets just before the sun makes a decision. She spoke first, before I could find my own words. I did not come here only because of Michael, she said. I came because after he called the engagement off, I stood in the middle of my apartment for 4 days, and I realized something. I was not sad about losing him. I was sad because I had been pretending for 7 years. I do not have nowhere to go because I ran out of money. I have nowhere to go because there is only one place I have ever wanted to be, and I never had the right to come. I did not answer right away. I looked at the wooden sparrow. I looked at the meadow. I thought about all the years I had not seen what was sitting at the end of the dinner table. I thought about how the kindest people in a room are very often the ones who say the least, and how the loudest grief is almost never the deepest one. Sarah, I said, I have been divorced for 4 years. I never knew you thought of me like that, and if I had known back then, when I was still married to your sister, I am not sure I would have been kind enough to leave it alone. I want to believe I would have. I am not certain, and I am old enough now to be honest about that with you. She nodded slowly. I know. That is why I never said it. I wanted you to keep being the kind man you were. I sat down across from her. Both of my hands went around the warm coffee cup because I needed something to hold. I told her, I cannot let you stay here as the ex-sister-in-law with nowhere else to go. That is not fair to you, and I cannot tell you I love you in the same week Elena threw your past at my front door. Neither one of those would be honest. You deserve a sentence from me that was not bought with a fight. She watched me. She did not interrupt. She held her coffee in both hands and let me speak. Go back to Roanoke, I said. Finish the school year. Teach your kids. I will be here. If after 4 months you still want this, you come back. Not because you have nowhere else, because you choose this, because the door you walked through is the one you actually wanted to find. That was when she cried. It was the first time in the whole story. Not loud, not folded over the table, just a few quiet tears she did not wipe away. The way someone sets down a weight they have been carrying for so long they had forgotten it was a weight. She nodded. Then she asked, "Are you afraid I will not come back?" "Yes," I said, "but I am more afraid of you coming back because there was no other door." She packed slowly that afternoon. She folded her 2 dresses, her sweater, the books she had read on the porch, the small toiletry case she had unpacked on the bathroom shelf. She left the wooden sparrow standing on her windowsill. I noticed when I carried the suitcase down for her, and I went back up and held it in my palm and looked at it a long time. "You are not taking it?" I asked. "I have kept it for 7 years," she said. "It is your turn." I drove her to the Amtrak station in Charlottesville that evening. We did not talk much on the way. The fields slid past, green and silver, and the radio played softly underneath us. She held her hands in her lap. Once, near the small town of Afton, she reached over and rested 2 fingers on the back of my wrist where it lay on the gear shift. She did not look at me. I did not look at her. She kept her hand there for half a mile, and then she folded it back into her lap. When we pulled into the lot, I lifted her suitcase out of the trunk and I walked her to the platform. She turned to me before she stepped up into the car. Her eyes were clear and she did not look afraid. "Adam," she said, "I do not need you to promise me anything. I just need you not to close that door again." I nodded. The conductor called the last boarding. The train pulled away. I stood on the platform a long time after it was gone, smelling damp grass and paper coffee cups, and the slow exhaust of the diesel, hearing the station agent's voice come tinny through the speakers, and I let the platform empty around me until I was the only person still standing there. I drove home to an empty house. For the first time in 4 years, the silence was not a comfort. The bedroom upstairs still smelled faintly of the lavender soap she used. The wooden sparrow stood on my own windowsill now, where I had moved it after she left, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time, holding the bird in my palm the way she had held it 100 mornings, learning the weight of waiting. The first month went by like a long work day. I sent her a small box I made by hand, dovetailed in pine, with a single block of walnut inside, cut from the underside of the table she used to sit at for breakfast. I did not include a letter. I did not even put my return address on it, although she would have known the handwriting. 4 weeks later, a postcard arrived in my mailbox with her handwriting on the back. I hung it next to the chalkboard in my 4th grade room. She did not sign it. She did not have to. I put the postcard in the drawer where I keep the things I cannot throw away, and I went back to work, and the work got me through to the end of June, the 2nd month. Elena called me one evening from Miami. She told me she was engaged again, to Ryan this time. "I just wanted you to know I am okay," she said, in the tone of a person who needs you to believe a thing more than she needs you to be happy for her. I told her, "Congratulations, Elena." I hung up the phone and waited for some old feeling to rise. It did not. Not anger, not regret, not even relief. The name Elena Whitmore had finally become a neutral sound, like a street I no longer drove down. I sat at the kitchen table for a while afterward, listening to the refrigerator hum, and I understood that I had stopped being a man who had been left by someone. I had become a man who had simply moved out of the building. A week after that, Michael sent me a long email. It was full of the word "I" and very few mentions of Sarah. He said he understood now that the engagement had been a mistake on both sides. He hoped I knew there were no hard feelings. He used the word "closure" twice. I did not answer. I marked it read and dragged it into the trash, and the silence of not replying felt cleaner than any sentence I could have written. The fourth month, a librarian up in Roanoke called me about a restoration job. The old Creswell Public Library needed every rosewood shelf in their reading room rebuilt before the centennial. I took the job. I did not tell Sarah. I drove up on a Tuesday, checked into a small hotel near the river, and spent 2 days measuring shelves and taking photographs and pretending I had not chosen Roanoke on purpose. On the second night, I walked past the elementary school where I knew she taught. The lights were still on in the fourth grade hallway. Through the window, I could see her cleaning the chalkboard with the slow, patient strokes of someone who was not in a hurry to get home. I stood across the street for a long time. I did not knock on the window. I did not call her name. I went back to the hotel and I did not sleep. And in the morning, I drove home in the dark. And I gave myself the rest of the month. 4 days before the end of the fourth month, I heard the sound of small suitcase wheels on gravel. I was in the workshop. I came out wiping my hands. Sarah stood at the head of the gravel path, exactly where she had stood that first day in June, except this time she carried a small overnight bag instead of the silver case. I opened the door the same way. She said, "I came because I chose to come." I did not say a word. I came down the porch steps. I put my arms around her. For the first time, she exhaled into my shoulder like she had been holding her breath for 7 years, and I held her in the middle of the wild roses for as long as it took for both of our hands to stop trembling. The next summer, the porch behind the farmhouse looked different. Sarah had moved in slowly, the way she did everything. A box of books one weekend, a small painting of a sparrow the next. She was still teaching, but at the small village school just outside Lexington, 15 minutes on foot from the front door. I had expanded the workshop and built her a slanted drafting table by the south window because she had started illustrating a children's book and the natural light was best there. She published the first one that fall. The dedication page just read, "For the Carver." On the windowsill of our bedroom, the wooden sparrow still stood. Beside it now was a second one, slightly smaller, that I had carved on her 33rd birthday from a piece of cherry I had been saving for years. She had cried when I set it down next to the first one, and then she had laughed at herself for crying, and then she had taken my hand and held it against her cheek for a long, quiet minute that I will remember for the rest of my life. 2 years after she came back, on a quiet Tuesday morning, she set a cup of ginger tea down in front of me instead of coffee. I looked up. She smiled, but she did not say anything. She did not have to. I stood up and put my hand on her stomach very lightly, and we stayed like that for a long time without words, with the dawn just beginning to lift the edge of the meadow into color. She finally said, "I was going to wait until tonight to tell you." I said, "You did not have to. I knew the second you set down the cup." 4 years after the morning she first walked up that gravel path, our daughter Emma was 4 years old. She had Sarah's brown hair and my serious eyes. That afternoon, she ran across the back porch in a little dress and bare feet, carrying the smallest of the 4 wooden sparrows in her tiny fist. I had carved that one the week she was born from scrap of maple, smaller than the first 2, with one wing tucked away. Newborn things tuck themselves. Sarah sat beside me on the porch swing I had built one winter, her head against my shoulder, the meadow stretching gold and green into the maples as the bees moving over the wild roses, the way they had moved that first morning. I thought then about the morning 4.5 years earlier when she had stood in the middle of the wild roses with a silver suitcase and said, "I have nowhere left to go." For a long time, I had believed it was a cry for help. I understood now that it had been the quietest confession of love I had ever been given. I had opened a door once for a woman who had nowhere left to go. I did not know that day I was also opening a door for myself to come home. I used to believe love had to come from someone new, someone with no connection to the part of my life I wanted to forget. I was wrong. Sometimes the right person was there the whole time, sitting at the far end of the table watching you get hurt and waiting 7 years for the right to speak. Sometimes the sentence "I have nowhere left to go" is the bravest thing a private person knows how to say. Elena taught me that some marriages are like a stage. The lights come on and no one in the room is real. Sarah taught me that some kinds of love are like woodwork. You wait for the grain to dry, you cut along the line, you sand, and you oil. And at the end of all that patience, it is still real wood. I do not regret the divorce. I only regret the 4 years it took me to understand that the girl who once asked very softly, "Are you okay?" was the only question that ever saved a man like me. There are doors you close to protect yourself. And there is one door, if you are brave enough to open it again, that will lead you back to where you were always meant to be. If a person has loved you quietly for 7 years and never said a word, do you think they are weak or the strongest person you have ever met? And have you ever closed a door in your life that, looking back, you wish you had opened again? If Adam and Sarah's story touched you tonight, please tap the like button so I know this kind of quiet story deserves to keep being told. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter about ordinary, brave, soft-spoken people. And leave a comment below. Do you think Adam was right to send Sarah back for those 4 months? Or did he almost lose her forever? Thank you for staying till the end with me. I will see you in the next story.